Okay, Melissa, would you call our special session or
Yeah,
work
calling
session?
the July 12th work session at 4:11. Mayor Mark Sukup,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brett Hansen,
Here.
Councilmember Lisa Lake,
Here.
Councilmember Robert Oxmacher,
Present.
Councilmember Luke Wagner.
Here.
Okay, Brian, I'm going to hand off to Aaron. Aaron, I'll hand off to you.
Yeah, and I'll be very brief. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for being here this afternoon, coming in early for the work session. This is a topic we've had on our radar as a staff for quite a while. If you'll recall, last fall during the community survey, we had a question specifically about broadband and internet service. We received an 83% positive response towards that, which at the time, Council directed us to start inquiries into that, which led us to Ditesco, who we've been working with for quite a while, several months since that time, essentially. They've prepared the report that you have all seen, and they'll be here to present some of the highlights of that and help facilitate a discussion as the subject matter experts. So Keith, you have met, and Nathan, who are from Ditesco. We also have Mark Pfaffinger, who's here representing Larimer County. And then the other touch point for this, I think, is the April ballot when we talked to and had folks vote on the SB 152, whether we wanted to opt out. And we had about 75% of folks vote to opt out of that. So we feel as a staff, that's a pretty compelling, between that and the community survey, folks are looking for better internet service, and they're looking to the town to help provide some leadership on that. So tonight, as I said, we have Ditesco who will be presenting, and then we hope to have a good discussion about what our paths could be forward and what we can do to help facilitate that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Keith to present at the high level some of the findings from their report.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it. Mayor, council members, thanks for having us this evening and allowing us to present on this topic. I will run through the slide presentation, but also Mayor's made requests to use this staff report as a guide. There's a number of questions on the second page of the staff report that was submitted or provided with your packet. So we'll address those in this presentation and follow along through the staff report as well as we run through that. So again, thank you. Here to talk about broadband. So part of our work in the overall study that we did for the town of Timnath was to understand current market conditions. What is happening in the marketplace and how does that affect towns like Timnath and others in the Northern Colorado area? As we've all witnessed from the COVID pandemic, the need for additional high-speed internet throughout our community is very important. So to provide things like telehealth, economic development, future-proofing, smart city initiatives, all of those things require high-speed internet. So internet service on a national level, the FCC and the National Telecommunications Administration have changed their approach, and they've changed their base standard into what internet service really means to communities. They used to have a 25, if I say 25 up, 3 down, that means 25 upload, or 25 download, 3 upload. And they used to have that as their standard. Now they're using 100 megabits per second symmetrical. So 100 down, 100 up as their baseline standard for projects that they fund through grant applications. So we've discovered through multiple sources, UCLA test data that was in the tech memo we provided, as well as county-based test data, and certainly the state broadband office test data, that much of Timnath has a service level of that, much less than that 100 symmetrical. So how do we address that connectivity? That's the primary question that we're all faced with, and our study meant to provide alternatives to do that. Who are the existing providers in the marketplace? What do those things look like, and what are the costs relative to bringing high-speed broadband to Timnath, should you choose to do that and fund those types of initiatives yourself? And then we're really looking at delivery models. How does that play out? There's municipal broadband in the area. There's public-private partnership alternatives that have been used in the area and others. And so we looked at those and discussed those in our tech memo. So the unique thing, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about this, the unique opportunity that the town of Timnath has in the marketplace is really taking a bit of advantage of what others are doing around you. You certainly have private sector alternatives around you, and then you have municipal broadband initiatives happening actively in the area that are at your doorstep. And that gives you a unique opportunity to look at and compare and contrast those alternatives. One thing, Mark, as Aaron said, Pfaffinger, the CIO for the Larimer County, is here. I'm going to bring him up and let him talk a little bit about the Northern Colorado Initiative, specifically relative to what the county's doing in their strategic plan relative to broadband, because it affects all of the communities in the Larimer County area. So Mark, if you don't mind spending a few minutes.
Happy to do it. Again, Mark Pfaffinger, CIO for Larimer County. I'm also a broadband project manager for Larimer County. Larimer County has been researching and investing time and energy into studying broadband for over 10 years. We've done large feasibility studies. We've also done engineering analysis throughout the county to figure out how big this problem is that the county faces.
Hey, Mark, I'm going to ask you for a favor. I left my hearing aids at my home, and it is turned on. But if you'd get closer to the mic, I think I'll be able to hear a little better.
Is that any better?
That's a lot better.
Okay, absolutely. So, as I said, the county's done numerous studies. We've also we've done surveys, analysis. We know this is a big problem in the community. We originally felt like it was a problem only in rural areas, but have come to realize after analysis that we have a large problem in the urban areas, especially what we call urban fringe, or some of the smaller municipal communities have very little competition or access to high-speed broadband. And so we did provide you a summary of our large recent strategic plan, which really defined what county's goal was and how we wanted to serve as a facilitator and partner to bring better connectivity to the entire area of Larimer County. No matter where you are in Larimer County, you're living, playing, working, we're invested as an entire community. We can't just limit our scope as a county just to a specific city or a specific rural area. We have a lot of mobility between areas that require us to look at this holistically. So we've been really approaching this as we feel strongly that the best approach in terms of long-term investment for the community is a community-owned asset for broadband, that a public utility provides the best long-term sustainable option for communities, and that's the county's strong position on this. We realize it's also a challenging and daunting objective where governments need to step up and think long-term in terms of how to bring these types of services to their communities and to build the service models and funding models to make it happen. I'll probably just touch on these quick bullet points on the number one area of the handout I've provided. As I said, we really need adequate infrastructure for our growing community. We already have indications that high-speed connectivity is going to be very important for a number of areas of economic improvement. Working from home through COVID became very obvious. But things such as health and telemedicine in communities that rely on connectivity to run their city government initiatives, smart cities are going to require a lot of infrastructure. And also things like future-proofing wireless. 5G technology requires that fiber optic cable system within your community in order to facilitate future technology initiatives that are coming out, as well as a number of things that I don't even know yet. I just know that in the future, broadband connectivity and speed is going to be an important player in the digital and data-driven economies that are starting to emerge within the world. We, as Larimer County, want to make Larimer County stand out as the most connected community in the nation. And we have an opportunity to do that with our 3 municipal partners who have already built and developed a stronghold within the community with 3 anchor institutions that are doing large fiber to the presence projects, as well as they've built capacity to expand that into all areas of the community. And their statutes allow them to run their utilities outside of their municipal boundaries. So it's really unusual in the nation to have an opportunity like that, to leverage anchor tenancy that's already built a lot of the technology, the service desk, the components, and the engineering to be able to expand into other areas of a community. And so that's something I really think you should be thinking about. We also need to, we've been doing this as a collaborative. So the city of Fort Collins is not doing it on their own, the city of Loveland or Estes Park. We've been meeting as a collaborative organizations for over 5 or 6 years, trying to stay lockstep with each other in the technologies we choose. How do we get connectivity to the larger backbone of the internet? Just because we build fiber to the presence doesn't mean you get high-speed internet. You have to get to the superhighway. So believe it or not, Northern Colorado doesn't have a lot of pathways into the superhighway. We only really had Denver. Now we're starting to have opportunities because of these municipal networks to build connectivity into Cheyenne and get onto another backbone connection into the large internet, which is really how you get to all the services that you're looking for. So as I go down to my bullet points, the other thing that I think is important is you leverage the commodity of scale. So when you start to leverage existing networks and expand them, it's much less expensive to run those networks, and they become more resilient for services or interruptions, or the more houses you serve, the lower cost it is to run these utilities. So all these communities are very open to expanding their networks because it makes it more resilient for everybody. The county has been targeting areas of need. So we have somewhat of a focus on rural areas of Larimer County that have even worse connectivity than Timnath. But we also want to be a community partner to make sure that we're not leaving anybody out. And so I speak on behalf of the commissioners who are looking for opportunities to help with grant funding opportunities, with partnerships in order to leverage some of the new funding models, which I believe you're going to touch on later. There's some key components to being competitive in those marketplaces. And most of them involve community consortiums, really working as a collaborative community in order to access those funds. And I think the last thing is we believe fiber to the presence is really the future. You want to build resilient, long-term, future-proof technology that'll last well past our tenure on this earth in order to provide services for the next generation. Fiber optic technology has no technical limitations at the moment that we can see. It'll handle many future-proof technologies, and it doesn't have the issues of saturation you'll see in wireless type solutions. We can expand these networks beyond our wildest dreams at the moment. Light has really unlimited possibilities for performance. And I will say, the one thing you can look at in a market, the other reason the county is also focused on community-owned and public utility models is really all you have to do is look to your neighbors. Greeley has services provided through ALLO at $105 a month on average. City of Fort Collins is currently providing gigabit symmetrical internet at $59.95 a month. So at $45 different or something in that nature, that's a lot of capital money that community is spending on a public provider in order to profitize that market. And that's a very expensive proposition for the residents in that community. So I think it does require each community to consider what's right for them, but it does take, you really need to stop and think about why are those private providers in the market? And the fact that if there is that much profit available, how could that be reinvested into the community for things like equity, access and availability, and providing long-term digital equity initiatives in the communities? That's where those monies should be invested, in my opinion. So that's kind of the county's plan. Again, we're a facilitator, but we're also we have been investing some of our ARPA and capital fund money into grant writing opportunities for the community. And so we're not just on the peripheral as Larimer County, we're actually getting involved. And so we'd love to learn how we can also partner with you to help you be competitive in grants in the future, or whatever you decide as a community. Just know the county has a lot of expertise in this area, and we're always willing to be at the table with you to help you along the way.
Help if you could hear me.
I can.
So one of the things, could you tell me, my recollection while you're talking about cost is that in the Coloradoan, there is an over expenditure of 30 million on convexity, and convexity was coming back to the town for another 5 or 10 million. A, am I remembering that right? And B, that seems like a lot of, my concern is we get in this and all of a sudden it ends up being double to triple the cost that we thought it was going to be. And I know we're going to talk about costs later, but this was coming out for Collins. So since you're with convexity in quotes,
Connection.
I thought you might know the answer to that.
I don't specifically know the answer, other than I do know that the city of Loveland has done a pretty good job staying within their costs. And I think Diteska maybe can speak a little more closely about this. I think a lot of this comes down to just traditional, very elaborate contract and management of contractors. And so it is an expensive market to be in right now. There's a lot of demand for broadband at the moment. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And it doesn't mean you're also competing with the private sector is also trying to build out networks. But my understanding is they're still within their financial models to be successful as a utility.
Well, that's what they keep saying, but every time there seems to be a check on it by outside individuals or the Coloradoan in it, that there's overruns.
I think Keith may have better.
Mr. Mayor, yeah, we actually help Connection in Fort Collins a bit. We're working with them on their delivery of their project. They did go back and request additional financing for their project. Primarily, you know, the way these contracts are configured relative to kind of longer deliveries over multiple years, they're typically configured in a way that gives the material supply, for example, as a separate item inside the contractor's contract. So that's not fixed. So they're not trying to price contracts or material pricing, for example, well in advance of when it's actually needed. So over the last course of 3 years of Connection being built, the material price increases have been extensive relative to the cost of the work, just because of the market changes and COVID and the demand for the materials. So some of that translated into additional costs.
And I'm not saying there was mismanagement.
Mm-hmm.
The point I want to make is that, say we want to follow Fort Collins model and they had cost overruns of 30 million. What are we doing? How do we stop something like that from occurring? Or do we need to build, is your $30 million that you're later going to talk about on the cost of doing something in Timnath really 40 million, because those costs are going to escalate greater than what you work for Fort Collins is going to be, you didn't anticipate that 30 million. Are you anticipating an increase in cost for us when you're saying 30 million?
Yes. So the cost estimates that were prepared for the town of Timnath as part of the study have cost escalation factors built into them. It all depends upon when the work is actually delivered and when and how it's delivered. You know, how much is capital financed or funded by Timnath, how much isn't. And really all of those pieces, like grant funding, for example, that Mark just talked about, are components of financing the project. And so it really depends when it happens. And we've done our best job to forecast existing costs, but
again, I'm not at all trying to be disparaging, but I am saying if this happened here, why won't it happen to us now? That's my real question. And so, you know, that's it. I've got some other cost questions.
Sure.
Well, I'll go back to you because you brought it up, Mark. Sure. You said that the current cost for a Fort Collins resident is $59 a month.
So $59.95 is symmetrical gigabit internet connectivity.
Okay.
Correct.
So have they done an audit or financial statement of Connection from an operating standpoint yet? And I think the answer is no. And
a full audit, I don't think so.
Yeah, and so here's my concern, and you can comment on this, but how do we know 59 is the right number? You know, I mean, they sort of pulled it out of the air from everything I read in there. And so at this point, they could be losing $50 a month per subscriber to get them to the same price. And in 2 years or 3 years, that price is going to go from 59 to 109.
Yeah, I think every business plan needs to be looked at. City of Fort Collins has a lot of business accounts, which can provide additional revenue to balance out the residential. In a community like yours, you may not have as much of that.
Yeah.
If you're tipped a little farther residential, you'll be more like Loveland, who's currently at $74 a month for their symmetrical gigabit broadband. They also include, there's a lot of variables involved. They include wireless at no charge. If you want wireless provided with City of Fort Collins, it's an extra $10 a month. So when you do apples to apples, really, they're pretty similar.
What's pretty similar?
The cost between Pulse and City of Fort Collins gigabit. So
Okay.
what
The 79 and 59 you're saying are similar because of trying to
it's
compare
about
apples to
$5
apples.
different if you compare apples to
Okay.
apples. So Loveland is a little bit more expensive because of the nature of their network. I think that would be closer to what you would be looking at. I haven't seen the estimated financial models for Timnath, but I still think it's the research across the nation is anywhere from 30 to 40% less to do a municipally owned public utility than allowing a private provider to serve your community,
Okay.
if that helps.
Anybody else have? Go ahead, Brad.
Just a quick follow on to one of the questions Mark had. Your cost estimates, was that for I saw 5 to 8 years. It was unclear to me with, that 30 million number. Was that anticipating the shorter end of a build timeline, if we're talking about cost escalations?
Just so real quick though, just people's roles. So Keith is with Tesco. They wrote the technical memo, so he can answer those questions. Mark is with Larimer County, not associated with either Fort Collins or Loveland. They just kind of have been bridging those gaps between other municipalities and Fort Collins and Loveland and going after grant.
And Mark made the comment about the 59 stuff, so I assume that, and that's okay. If you didn't have the background, I apologize.
I have the
but
background and I was happy to provide it. The county is also doing projects with both Loveland and Pulse to expand internet connectivity into Larimer County. So we're investing $10 million into high value projects where those providers are now going to provide services for Larimer County residents. So we also care about the financial models and making sure that our investments have a return on our investment, just like you should care about that. So
yeah.
I am invested in those conversations as well and working closely with Tesco as an engineering partner to help look at those models to protect our interests as a county as we invest our revenue into projects just like you need to do, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Did you have something, Luke?
Yeah. So,
Oh,
so-
what? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The question was, that 5 to 8 year window in the planning period, where does that cost land? We assumed that the cost of that infrastructure build would be in that near term, in that kind of 5-year window. So it's a relatively low escalation rate relative to, to a build out of maybe longer than that. So
Okay. So if we took longer than 5 years, we would expect the escalation to go higher. Than
absolutely.
Take us higher. Than
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Do any of the City of Fort Collins or City of Loveland have data caps? Do they do anything like that?
No data caps.
So if, Mark, you said that this really doesn't have a limit at any point. So if there's, users that come into our town, does that affect any of that? Kind of how you see in fiber, with cable that we get that problem?
The current technology that is available is normally capable to go to 10 gigabit symmetrical. That's kind of where the price point is, but obviously there's back end cost to supporting 10 gigabit. You need a faster super highway to the internet and a lot of the infrastructure needs to be upgraded. Both Loveland and Fort Collins were engineered to be able to support 10 gigabit today. And so you can actually buy 10 gigabit residential services with the same components that they're going to install in your house as the typical 1 gigabit, as well as they also have a lower cost model plan at 100 megabits if you're just having trouble financially supporting that. The other thing they do is they also on the digital equity and inclusion side and trying to make it accessible to people, both municipal broadband as well are participating in the FCC's Affordable Internet Program, which will pay down the costs on behalf of any resident, the cost of their internet service down by, I think, $40 a month. And so when you put a lot of those together, because they're participating in all the necessary programs at the federal level as well as locally, they're really trying to, as a community, they're making internet accessible to everybody.
Was your question, Luke, about if there were to be maybe like a high data usage, maybe a business or something like that that came to Timnath, would this be able to support that?
Yeah, it's a part of that, right? Like, because I know if all of us are on the internet at the same time, functionally, it just slows down in Timnath. So that was one of my questions as well. And I was going to ask that is just, if we get one super user here, do we run into problems from that perspective?
And I can answer that. So the fiber networks are ubiquitous, so they don't necessarily have the bandwidth configuration that coaxial cable does, for example, on that type of network. And when you run into bandwidth problems, which is really your question as far as how many users can be on at the same time, if you had a 10 gigabit symmetrical user, so a high capacity business of some sort, really it's just an active network. It's not the things we're talking about today, the configuration of the outside plant from a fiber to the premise perspective. It's an active network side reconfiguration, which both pulse and connection can make very easily, and they actually have the ability to exceed 10 gigabits on the active network side to the what we call backhaul, or the main fiber backbone that Mark's been talking about nationwide. So it's actually a relatively simple reconfiguration to get more speed if you needed it. But like Connection, for example, has sold 10 gigabit symmetrical service to businesses in Fort Collins, and they're not restricted. That use in the downtown Fort Collins area is not causing bandwidth problems, if you will, for other users.
Okay. Mark, thanks a lot. Would you mind sticking around for a while? No.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here for the duration.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Keith. And
Thanks, sir. So a little bit more about Colorado initiatives and federal programs. So if you're watching the broadband marketplace, the Colorado Broadband Office is the entity that is accepting all the federal grants, and they are changing their programs very, very rapidly to react to some of the federal money that's coming through the Infrastructure and Investment Act. So the Broadband Office has really two primary funding mechanisms. One is called the CPF. It's the Capital Project Fund. In 2023, it'll be about $150 million worth of finance, worth of grant money available for funding projects. In addition to that, the IIJ money, the Infrastructure Investment Act money, is coming in the form of what's called a BEAD program, and that'll also funnel through the state broadband office into grants, and they're estimating that at around $700 million just for the state of Colorado. So if you look at, and our staff report talked about this a little bit, if you look at the money just coming between 2023, 2024 in the state of Colorado, it's going to be over $800 million for funding broadband initiatives statewide. And a lot of those are meant to do exactly what Mark talked about earlier, getting access to communities, underserved communities, getting access to rural areas. And they're in a process right now of accepting letters of interest from communities, of which we're writing 12 of those for Mark to provide those as advanced grant applications, essentially, to give the state an understanding of what the overall need is. So there's a lot of things actively happening in the market. The federal programs that the FCC, NTIA, USDA, they all sponsor broadband initiatives on an annualized basis to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. Lots of grants available for expanding broadband. So when we talk about how does that translate to Timnath, there's a lot of opportunity, and it won't fund everything that you're looking to do if you take it all the way to the premise, but it can help you get a good head start on a program. So when we talk about improving connectivity, we've talked about how financing and funding is available. Then we're getting into the list of questions in this particular slide. So the first question is what is the town of Timnath desired standard for internet speed. What does the town council desire to provide to the citizens from an internet speed standpoint? And the reason we ask this question from a staff perspective is it really translates to the infrastructure and the question of funding infrastructure. If your baseline standard is 110, for example, you probably have some private providers providing that in town now. Probably not everywhere, but maybe in the newer areas of town. If your desire is 10 gigabit per second speed symmetrical or greater, because there might be economic development opportunities, there's probably not a provider in town that can provide that type of speed to the community. So that's one of our questions today, and we can save these to the end, Mayor, if you'd like, or we can talk about them now.
Yeah, I think.
Yep.
And so I get those. Thank you. Direction to the staff, I think is a great idea. So, I don't know, I think I'll just let everyone make a comment. So Luke, what's your answer to that question?
Yeah, I think I would like to match our surrounding communities. So if that's a gig up, a gig down, that's what I'd like to see as a councilperson.
Brett?
I agree. 1-1.
Lisa?
Ditto.
Okay.
Yeah, I think anything less than a gig, we're not future-proofed. One question that I have, and maybe this is a good opportunity to pose it, is, future-proofing this. Certainly data is not going away. There's going to always be a data need. But how do we know that wired data is where things are going to be 20 years from now or 30 or 40 years from now, and that we're not talking about an investment that will be obsolete?
I'll let you answer that.
Okay. Yeah, I'll let Mark tag team here a little bit with me. The wireless solutions and the technology that currently exists in the marketplace are challenged by latency. You watch Elon Musk and Starlink and things of that nature. Great technology, great for rural access to broadband technology, suffer from latency and suffer from speed. If you talk 5G requires a fiber backbone to serve the small cell sites that would be surrounding or encompassing a community. So when you think about broadband and future proofing and think about fiber technology in its basic form, it, like Mark mentioned earlier, it really doesn't have a limit to capacity to it. The light doesn't have a limit to capacity. So in my professional opinion, even the future technologies that we're not even aware of now are going to get to into the ground, and they're going to be transferred via the internet, via fiber optic cable. Some of the unique things, we talked a little bit about this in our previous meetings, but some of the unique things that folks don't realize is that some of the first fiber optic cables, large bundles of fiber optic cable, spanned the Atlantic Ocean in the early 1980s. And those fiber optic cables are still in use today. And they're still pushing data between us and Europe, and it's really robust technology. So I personally have a hard time seeing how fiber optic networks throughout a community would ultimately become obsolete.
Hey, Keith, did you get your answer? Do you want to follow up?
I did, but just
Go ahead.
One quick point. Right now, as we've seen happen in the telephone space, landline phones have gone away. People are getting their telephones via their cell phone. I guess my concern is we put in this hardwired network and we're offering it up at, $60, $70, $80 a month. But Verizon's going to come in and give somebody something similar, and they're already paying for a phone. Their phone can be a hotspot, whatever. How do we not get pushed out of the market and then get left holding the ball without an income stream?
Sure, go ahead.
I think the thing that we're believe strongly on is these are compatible technologies. The one doesn't necessarily eliminate the other. They work in combination. And so as a community-owned asset, as a network, you'd be able to sell services to the next generation wireless provider, because they're not going to want to come in and build infrastructure in your neighborhoods. So you'll be able to sell services to more maybe wireless carriers instead of home providers. And so the demand may shift in terms of how you get your revenue back, but the need for that bandwidth and connectivity will just continue to go up. So the demand for data over the last 5 years has been growing exponentially. The use of information to make real-time decision-making for issues of safety in communities, for collecting data, for response, for public safety is a good example. Until you have those kinds of sensors out in your community and that's collecting really big sets of data, you won't be able to benefit from those new technologies that are coming out. And so light is really unique. It doesn't require what's called modulation on top of a wavelength. It's colors. So basically, if you consider light as an infinite number of colors, you can actually splice up the light that goes through a fiber optic cable by its color sources. And the expansion capability of that makes it a really great transport model. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily know in 50 years whether or not people will more likely sit on their cell phones versus a home internet connection, but my belief is that they'll have both.
I think we had a sort of a unanimity on or a majority on wanting 1G and going with that.
Mark, can I interrupt?
I'm sorry.
Can I ask another question?
Oh, absolutely.
So, sir, is there the schools in Fort Collins? Brett brought up a really great point. Are the schools connected through Connexion and Pulse? They've gotten to the schools.
That's a great question. At Pulse, yes. So the Thompson School District in the city of Loveland is connecting to Pulse. And Mark can talk a little bit more about this too. The schools in Fort Collins, it depends. So a good majority of the schools themselves are connecting to Connection. The school, like the Poudre School District headquarters, I think is connecting to Zayo. So it depends.
So the county has partnered with Poudre Valley REA as well as the school district and the city of Fort Collins and Loveland for many years. Probably 20 years ago, we built a fiber network throughout the community. And part of that was to build connections to many of those anchor institutions. So we actually did do a fiber project prior to the one we're working on that uses CSU's connection to the internet through the Gigapop, which is actually down through Boulder and Longmont into Denver. And so most of us are on a Front Range, it's called the Front Range Community Network. There's a lot of public entities behind city of the CSU's network that gets connectivity into the internet. This was prior to Connection. What's happening now is they're starting to go back and rethink that. And as services available to different school locations, my belief is they're going to start shifting those to connection circuits at some point, or they're going to provide that as a backbone, as a backup connection. So what's happening now is one connection into a school maybe isn't enough. And so they might need multiple for redundancy. And so a lot of them are looking at connection as a redundant second internet connection, because if that goes down, school almost stops these days. And so that's the other resiliency factor that we're considering when we're building these fiber networks. And what's engineered into Ditesco's analysis is an engineered, very resilient network that can survive cuts and outages in different areas of the network.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Mark.
Okay. So great conversation, great questions. The next item on the presentation, just what does the funding look like? We talked a little bit about grants. We talked a little bit about how they operate relative from the state and from the federal government down through the state, and how that funnels down through grant applications. The county has been leading a very intentional and fairly aggressive effort to apply for grants. And they've been at the forefront. The county hosted the very first state broadband office work session to bring folks together to talk about how the grant programs are going to work, how to expand fiber optic networks throughout communities, and leverage municipal providers. So it's been a very intentional and productive program. The grants that are currently out there all require local matches. So Typically, it's 25%. So if there was a capital funding improvement plan for the town and you were aggressively pursuing grants, those opportunities exist, knowing that there's also a local match to access that grant money. So that's your share. So if you had $1 million grant, you'd be expected to come to the table with $250,000. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I didn't have my.
That's okay. The community-based projects and programs that Mark mentioned earlier that we've talked about, those are the ones specifically outlined in the state's approach and their criteria for selection of grant recipients that the community-based organizations, whether it's a county or a municipal government, they are given priority in those grant applications and awards currently. And to the point that some of the programs that the state's sponsoring do not allow private ISPs to access that grant money. So if a private provider is going it alone, if you will, and they're trying to access that grant money, the state will not accept their grant application. They're requiring the community be partnering with the private ISP, or it be a community-based application to be eligible to receive the grant money. So it's a very important point, and again, that's a major change in how the federal and state programs have been awarding grant money to have that community sponsorship.
So I'm gonna try to chop this down, Keith, and just see. It seems like there's several parts to the financial model. One is the initial capital investment. You've identified and had a nice sheet there that showed $30 million, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
And then continuing operations. I'll get back to that, but that would be the second. And then the third is, and it's sort of a arrangement / financial of partnership / grant type of participation in the project. So it's what's your capital structure look like, grants or partnership or do it alone, sole proprietorship, or and then, so that's one. Second, what is our upfront capital cost? And the third is what is the day-to-day operations of it? So, you know, maybe if we try to stay with those so I can keep track of what we're really saying to each, and maybe what we do, it's hard to break those up into separate discussion modes. You almost have to discuss them together. So let's do that. And actually, for once, I'm going to go first as the accountant. So go ahead.
Well, I just had one point. If you're looking at the staff report discussion topics,
Yes.
I wonder if it would be more beneficial for us to talk about number 3 first, which is the potential delivery method, because I think,
and then go back to
because
2.
I think
I'm
those,
fine with that.
Those 2 are going to kind of set up that discussion that you're just talking about a little bit more.
So first off, I'm going to go back to you, Keith, then. If we start with 3, was there anything in addition that you'd like to comment upon on that?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Happy to jump into that topic.
So that makes it a little easier. So we're going to go down to Lisa. Since you're in the middle, you don't ever get first. So Lisa, why don't we start with you on 3? What strategic delivery do we want to achieve from this service?
Well, that's not a very easy question to answer. Did you have something to say first?
I'm going to duck in here. I think this is, and I'm sure Keith and Mark are going to agree with this, and Brian, this is an initial discussion that we're going to have 3 or 4 more work sessions on. I mean, we're not going to get to a conclusion today. We're not going to get to a conclusion because there's going to be so many dangling ones that, well, if, you know, let's get real. If you can get me a $25 million grant and we got to come up with 5, we can probably figure that out real dang quick. If you can't get any grant and we got to come up with 30, I have a different answer. So that's, but we need to research all that to get there. You don't know what grants I assume you don't know what grants we could get and not get at this point. It's, hey, these are available, but can we get it and can we acquire them? Am I putting words in your mouth?
I would say that we have a good idea of the grants that you are eligible for as a community, to the point where one of the hopes I had was that we would have town council direction this evening on at least getting your name in the hat in this LOI process with the state and providing those letters of interest to the projects that we feel you're eligible for in that program and getting those submitted. Our deadline for that is July 18th. That's next week. So that there's no commitment on you to do anything other than this is a project that, quite frankly, the county already sponsors, and in partnership with the Timnath, community-based, you would be eligible theoretically for those.
So Keith, I think you underscored what I was saying is it's impossible for us to give a solid line, bold line direction because we don't know what the grant's going to come back. Correct. I mean, we can give a soft, put us in the pot. I don't know if whatever we're going to decide here, but put us in the pot. But until we know how much that pot's going to come back, the direction we give staff and how we go forward, I think depends upon that grant. So I'm getting nods, so I think I'm halfway close. So Lisa, so I think
I can give you a quick answer.
Yeah, go.
Okay, so my initial thought, which I reserve the right to change my opinion if more information comes to me that says otherwise, but my initial thought would be to look at municipal partnerships. And I personally think it's a hard yes, put our name in the hat, because I do think there are some funds available no matter which direction we kind of go. And I would certainly want our name to be out there for that.
Okay. Robert.
I'm in agreement that if this is something that moves forward based on what I've seen, municipal partnerships seem like the best option at this point. And also certainly if there are deadlines that we miss out on by not moving things forward here, I think we want to be conscious of that. But I'm also not ready to pull the trigger and say that, yes, this is all a given and we will make it happen no matter what. So I think we should move in that direction, try to maximize funding, but at least right here today, I'm not 100% on board that this thing must happen.
You think you're next?
I'm ready if you call me though. If you don't, I'll sit back.
I see your mouth open and your light on, so go ahead.
Yes, I'll just agree. I think going for grants seems like an obvious answer. And then my understanding is municipal partnerships puts us in stronger position for that from what I've had explained to me today. So that is it.
Just a clarifying question. If we do P3, are we eligible for grants?
It depends on the grant type. Largely no. Yes, if you're sponsoring the grant and not the private entity. So it depends on the grant type and the program. There would be potential to have the P3 participate in a grant program if they're not the applicant. If the town's the applicant and the town's sponsoring it and you're bringing an ISP along with you, the P3 arrangement and how that agreement works and how grants play into it, it becomes very complicated. So it's a hard question for me to answer right now.
Yep. Based on that, I would say municipal partnerships. Thank you.
So if it wasn't for the grant, I'd want us to do a P3 because I think industry always can figure out the most economical. They don't want to lose money. Whereas, my concern a little bit like what happened with Fort Collins, we overcost. Well, let's go get another 30 million from the taxpayers. So I'm not ever really excited about a municipal ownership of a business. That said, if we can get grants and get a significant amount of grants, and that's how we do it, then obviously let's go municipal. So it gets, I think it goes back to Robert, I think had a good, I think we need a whole lot more info. I think what you did is great because it got us neophytes into, or at least got me, let me throw me under the bus. You know, it got me who doesn't understand all this real well. I've never dealt with it. I don't know how it works. I don't know costs that, that you got us up to speed so we can at least talk about something. But I think we're, in my opinion, year, 2 year, 3 years away, because I know that's going to be a question here later too, before we ever can say, this is what we want to do and this is how much we're spending and let's go forward. I think we just need a lot more information on it before we can get to a absolute. Now, you asked the question and we'll ask it later, but that doesn't, I don't want to dissuade anybody as we talk later that we don't put our names in the hat and ask to get as much grant as we can. And that's one of the things, that's one of the infos in that I need to make a good decision going out. Okay, so did we sort of answer that question? So then, I don't know if you want to lead into this. We'll go back now to 2. And Keith, if we took any of your thunder away, please comment. And if we didn't, we'll talk amongst ourselves again.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the capital funding, local matching, and leveraging grants. I think this community, the size and your proximity to adjacent municipalities, I think it will be a potpourri approach. I don't think you will be eligible for 100% grants to fund everything. I think the town will have to come to the table with some level of money if you want to build out a network. I do think, though, that there are community partners that are wanting to help that situation. Larimer County sitting here saying we will help. And so I think that solution is multi-pronged. It's a multi-pronged approach. When we talk about the P3 alternative versus the municipal alternative, there are distinct benefits and differences between both delivery model. The P3 agreements, normally it's a public-private partnership. So normally the public is giving something up to the private sector in exchange for their investment in that infrastructure or that community asset. Normally the community never gets to own that asset, or they do maybe 30 or 40 years after the life cycle of the asset has likely expired, a good portion of it. So there's benefits and constraints to both. The municipal model, depending on how it's funded, the municipalities are willing to share revenue. So that's a key component of your consideration in potentially partnering with other municipalities. When Mark said earlier, I haven't seen the business model behind it. Nobody's seen the business model behind it because we haven't built it for you. Because we don't know what that looks like for the town of Timnath. When Mark says he's partnering with Connection and Pulse on business models to serve other areas of the county, there are revenue sharing models that are being considered by both of those communities and the county to share back revenue coming from the municipal providers to the county to offset some of their initial investment and some of the capital expenses. And so that particular model, should you choose to do so, would likely exist for the town of Timnath as well. And what that means is if you invested capital, 5 million, 10 million, whatever it is, and that benefited the installation of infrastructure owned by one of the other municipalities, they're willing to come to the table and say, we will share back revenue with you long-term. So that is a key consideration and difference between how the P3 model could potentially work and how the municipal model could potentially work. So we haven't gotten to that point yet with the town of Timnath because we don't know precisely what that project looks like for you or what that business plan looks like for you. But that's a key point in this portion of the revenue opportunities. And then if you did invest capital, you have the ability to lease that asset. So if you're installing conduit, for example, in new subdivisions, or you make that as part of your development criteria, we'll talk about that here shortly, and developers are installing that conduit, and then you own that conduit upon acceptance from that, potentially that's an option. I don't know. But if you have that sort of community-based asset, you now have space underground that you can lease. And that's a pretty big deal. It's pretty attractive to people to lease conduit space. It's attractive to lease potentially dark fiber. You have to ask yourself business questions around that we were going to cover as far as what you own and what you don't own and what you want to maintain as a community and what you don't want to maintain. But there are revenue generating opportunities for the town if you invest in those capital assets or if you carefully make arrangements and business plans with municipal providers. So those opportunities exist. And that's a complicated, a lot of things I said in a short period of time, but those opportunities exist. And those models are now in the process of being implemented in other parts of the county.
Handing off back to us?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, this time I will talk first as the accountant. I'm going to ask you something, Keith, that I did not see. What's the operating expenses per household?
So the operating expenses per household exist on the ISP side or on the provider side, whether it's a P3 or
Which were the provider, so, right?
No, if you were in a municipal partnership, connection would be
Okay,
your
that's on
provider
a P3. What if we're in a municipal partnership with?
Same answer. The operational costs are covered by that municipal provider, whether it's Connection or Pulse or whomever. Their operational costs are on their side of the ledger. You're not responsible for operational costs in your questions around the business plan.
So the 30 million is, so what we're doing is we're a capital investment of 30 million and somebody else operates it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I didn't understand that, which again gets back to why I don't understand some of this stuff. So on when you're talking about share revenue, that operator of the service agrees that they will share some of the income that they get from that service if there is income.
That's correct. I think Brian had a point to make too.
Well, just so one of the questions is, so the 30 million would basically install the infrastructure to provide the services.
Right.
We wouldn't operate those services, right? It would be tied to either Connection or Pulse or whoever that ends up being. They would provide the service through the network that we created. One question is, what part of that network would we want to own and what part of that network would we want to give to them? Because if, as a municipality, we do not operate any utilities right now. So if we own those utilities, and I'm just going to use a water analogy, right? So there's a water plant that somebody owns. We build a bunch of pipes. Their water flows through their pipes to our residents. We're responsible for maintaining those pipes if we're going to own them. In most development scenarios, those pipes are dedicated to the water provider. They maintain that, but then our residents have that service.
Okay. So who's getting the $59 a month?
The provider would. So it would
Okay,
be
so
Connection or Pulse in that example.
That gets to my point of what I wanted to sit there and get to. So if we put up, let's just say 30 million and ignore grants and stuff. We put up 30 million, we will have no revenue coming in because it all goes to the other provider. You're shaking your hand, right or wrong?
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, some of that revenue comes back to you in form of that share back I was talking about.
Well, only in a share back, but only if there's profit and only if there's a share back arrangement with that municipality, correct?
So yes, so Larimer County is going through this process right now. We have 4 neighborhoods we're working with Lebanon Pulse to build out. I think it's a total of $10 million. Each of those neighborhoods has a financial model associated with it. let's just say, for lack of a better number, 30% is an operating cost to maintain and keep all the infrastructure up and provide truck rolls to the community and all that kind of stuff. Typically in a municipal network, they would be also getting revenue to pay back their bonds because they got money.
Correct.
Right. So if the town came to them with the capital investment, then they should have money in their revenue model to be able to pay back that investment. And so the county's looking for revenue models where we would recoup over time, 20 years, whatever it is, maybe 30 in different neighborhoods, depending on how lucrative the neighborhood and what the take rates are, how many people are signing up for service, what the cost per month per resident is. All these variables you have to tune and decide which financial model works for your community that gets you the payback on your investment at the timeline that you're looking for, but also keeps the price low for your residents in order to make it a viable service for all of your citizens or your resident community. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And you went around the question I'm really trying to get to. If you take it and we got 30 million and we have 3,000 households, so that means that each household basically is subject to their share of that 30 million.
Yep.
The interest rate on 30 million, let's say we can get a double exempt and it's going to be 4%, maybe 3%. That's going to be $1.2 million that we've got to get on the operation of this. So if there's no profit or revenue in the operation of the internet service, we're out $1.2 million a year. And what I do not see yet or understand yet, and I think you said it hasn't been developed yet, which is fine, but I think there's no way we can make a decision on something that we don't know what our revenue in is. You know, right now, I have a real good feeling what it's going to be out. It's going to be at least $1.2 million, $1.4 million that's going to go out. We aren't responsible probably for the operating expenses since we aren't getting the revenue. But if if it turns out that that's a break-even operation, then we're not going to have any money to pay the 1.2 interest charge plus, and I haven't even worked in principal interest charge that we have. And I think we need to have, have a better understanding and have some very detailed analysis of what that operating income and expense is going to be.
We would, I mean, from the town standpoint, we would not put any of the infrastructure in unless we knew who was going to serve it and what rate of what share.
Fully understand that you're not going to do anything. I'm saying at this point, you're asking for conclusions from us, and I'm saying I'm not ready to do anything like that because I haven't seen the revenue model and a profitability or loss model that we are going to incur to do this. That's what I don't see.
So maybe I failed to preface the work session. I mean, I agree, Mark, we're going to have 5, 7 more work sessions about this stuff as we get further into all of those details.
And I'm not being critical of where we are because I think we're covering a whole lot of world on this thing. But what I am saying is, if you're expecting another answer of, hey, we go forward, sort of going back to what Robert said, I'm not ready to pull the plug on that at all.
No, I think we've been working on this for a while, and we got to the point where we didn't feel comfortable going any further, talking about any kind of partnerships or deals with anybody else until we got some feedback from you. I mean, I think
and I love your questions, Keith, that you developed up. I think it makes us think. It's made me think. Let's go. And I've learned some stuff that I didn't have a clue on what's going on. So I appreciate it. So I'm going to shut up because it's you guys' turn. So Luke, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I guess one of my questions when we talk about, I think this was brought up. So if we lay these out in the neighborhoods, is there like a water tap? Does it increase the price of the home? So is there an estimate of what that is when we look at that?
guess I can give this a shot. So
Yeah,
I've been researching this a bit, and the numbers at least about a year and a half ago, the number was about $20,000 in property value was the estimate for fiber optic service at gigabit or better symmetrical to a home. I think obviously as a region gets ubiquitous service at 1 gig, maybe that gets harder to validate. You also have competition now with other cities that are doing it, which to my other point is you have 2 cities that are doing it.
Mhm.
They have real world data now. So there's no reason we can't lean on Pulse and Connection for their take rates, what their operating costs are now that they're actually in operation. If this is going to take you a year to work through, the best answer you're going to get is now we know because we've actually done it. And so those are the kind of partners I would want to work with, the ones that actually have real world data.
Luke, can I ask him a real quick question? Will they share that with us if let's say we don't partner with them? I mean, let's go worst case. We won't partner with them. Will they share that info with us?
I would think so, Mr. Mayor. Outside of the caveat, if it impacts their competitive marketplace position. And I've heard similar, I've heard anecdotal evidence from brokers in both the Loveland and Fort Collins markets that it's anywhere between $15,000 and $20,000 increase in value in a home for gigabit symmetrical service.
The other thing I would add to that topic is that I know that there are people who are only looking for residences that can provide that. So by not providing that, I think there's a market that are people who are not interested in moving to Timnath because those services are not available to them.
and just for my clarification.
Turner can't wait to give us.
No, some other.
I'm being facetious.
Well, but some real estate people were talking about that, and I was asking them about, are you showing in Timnath? And they said yes, but certain people that we're working with who are coming from areas where they have that condition existing, they're not willing to give that up, and so that's kind of ruling some places out.
All right, I'm going to flip over.
Sorry,
Robert.
Mark, can I finish?
Oh, I'm sorry. I
One
didn't
more
know you
question.
still
No.
had questions.
So when we talk about capital expense, when we talk about $30 million, this is nothing more than what's current, right? Because we're assuming this is going to be priced into the houses going to the new neighborhoods. Is that right? So is that a fair question? And does that make sense when or when I look at the numbers, is that in the 30 million?
When you say priced into the houses,
So when we look for the capital expense and we're thinking $30 million, I guess I was confused on if we're saying the developer is going to put these in the homes, right? Like he's going to put that and it's going to be in the price of the home. They're going to sell the home with that. Or is the $30 million so where does that, in a new neighborhood?
it would be so a couple of things. The $30 million estimate is assuming that we're installing fiber to the home in an existing house, which is much more expensive than installing fiber to the house in a new build. Because number one, on your street, for example, to add a new utility there, you're tearing up people's yards, you're doing all this stuff, you're coming from the utility easement into the house. I mean, all of those things have an impact and a cost. If we're installing into a development such as the Landings where they're building the houses right now, you have a much lower cost because you can run those things before there's any improvements there. We can get the utility across streets much cheaper because we can lay conduit prior to them paving rather than us having to bore. So the 30 million is kind of the worst case scenario for that. But that would be all costs that the town would pay, and it wouldn't really, there wouldn't be a developer piece to that. Unless we were to modify our development code and require some of these things to be put in as they're developing.
Thank you.
I got a real quick follow-up question to yours. How many homes did you anticipate running the fiber optics to when you came to the 30 million?
So it assumes every premise inside the current town boundaries, as well as prospective development that's not been built. And to Brian's point, there's a few developments that are still in the planning stages that are raw ground. And we've assumed those costs as if it's an existing.
So how many homes?
I don't know if I have that number
Can
off
you
the top
get,
of my head, but
Brian, can you get that to us on an email
Sure.
on what that is?
But it would be all, I mean, it's every residence.
I understand, but he said certain developments. Well, I know there's the landings going on. There's Willis Farm. Was that included? What things were included there and what things weren't?
Yeah.
Mark, if I could jump in, it's every home and every subdivision, current and that will be built. If it's within the town limits, it is covered under the 30 million number.
If it, so the threshold that we were using was the sketch plan. So for an example, Fisher subdivision, right? They have their first phase that's been final platted. That's
Yeah.
about 125 units or something like that. But there's 750 units total. We accounted for 750 units.
Okay,
in that.
thanks. That was my question. Brett.
I guess I'll just comment that for me to get to the point where I feel comfortable pulling the trigger on this, we'll need to reach out to the community with just very simple 30 to 60-second digestible information. This is what it would cost. Are you interested? So I do hope we can get to that point where we can share that information. Other than that, I think this is something we do need to take seriously as a council. It's 75 to 80% of the community that wants this. I think it has some peripheral benefits to cell coverage potentially in the future, which is also a common complaint of the town. I know we've also dealt with a lot of complaints with other utilities that service the town, and it's frustrating when we just kind of have to shrug our shoulders and say, well, the power lines aren't ours or whatever. So it would be nice if we could up the quality of some of the services that come to Timnath. And so I'm with you, Mark, in terms of philosophically, I like to leave government out of some of these types of things, but with it being a very local type of situation, and the community's generally asked for a little bit better, I think I really want us to take this seriously and trying to make this work in a way that's good for the town.
So to clarify, the question was what we're willing to invest. Is that correct? Just making sure I've got this right.
yes, ma'am. So,
All right.
So I apologize on our behalf if we were seeking specific direction this evening. We're seeking general guidance.
Okay. So
And I, our next steps are here, does the council support grant participation? Does the council wish to pursue an RFP or negotiations? The general things that are the next steps for the program.
So I think earlier I definitely said as far as pursuing grants, I'm all on board for that because I've worked with many grants before and I know if the time comes and we're not ready, we can just say, sorry, we're not ready. So I'd rather have that as an option. As far as what we're willing to invest financially, I think that's just too hard to say right now. I think we need, to have some more numbers before I can say, yes, I'm willing to invest, willing to invest $60 million or whatever it is. But I agree, when the community residents were asked, they were willing to invest significant resources. So what that means is really something that I guess we'll find out kind of down the road. But I think we would need to do some community outreach and things like that. But I think I'm certainly ready to continue to pursue investigating this.
Share some of the mayor's thoughts that in a perfect world, free market competition would be providing cost competitive quality service in our community. But that doesn't exist now, and I see no reason why it would exist in the future. I think the marketplace is segmented and actually avoids competition to maximize profits. So I think it does make sense to view this as a utility. I do continue to have some concerns about future-proofing this. I do believe that the trend in terms of data usage will go away from fixed point source for your data to whatever it is that you're carrying around in your pocket. So maybe that doesn't happen for 30 years or 40 years on a wide scale, and maybe that's a time frame that we're comfortable with. But I do have some concerns about that. The mayor commented on timing. I think he mentioned a 1 to 3 year horizon to look at this. I think we ought to be careful about paralysis through analysis. I think that we should do our due diligence. We should make a good decision here. But we also, if it makes sense to act, we should not be afraid to act in the near term. I agree with Brian's point that it is much cheaper to install this, have this installed on a new build versus retrofit. Our town is only getting bigger, and the longer we delay this, the more we're going to have to retrofit as opposed to take advantage of the new build. I also have concerns with continuing inflationary pressures. The longer we put off investment, the more it could cost us in the long term. And I also think that there are resident expectations in terms of build out. I think we're going to want to, if we move forward, be real clear about what a reasonable build out timeline is, communicate that some people will get it sooner than others, and just really manage those expectations if we move forward. In terms of the identified next steps, I do think they all make sense to continue that process forward and investigate this.
All right, Keith, do you want to say anything about, I think we're at point 4.
Yes, sir. We talked a little bit about the strategic delivery models, and I don't think I have anything more to add there. I think, if I may, we're probably at the point of just really next steps as to what this council would like to see moving forward relative to these points. And Brian or Aaron, if you disagree, please misdirect me. But
well, if I could jump in just for a second, what I'm hearing is an interest in pursuing grants, which is time sensitive. So we can do that immediately with little to no cost. The other piece of this is, and we certainly understand, and I think Brian made the point well, is that as a staff, we felt like we had run out of runway and we needed permission to pursue and what to pursue. And so I'm hearing an appetite for a potential partnership with our municipal partners. So we have an ability to communicate with them and work on some of the more specific details. What would that business arrangement look like? What would our expectation be from a revenue standpoint, so that we can be more comfortable with what the agreement would be? And so we can start to pursue those things, finding out if they'll be willing to share their numbers with us. What kind of numbers would we expect from them? If we have that sort of permission, we feel much more comfortable to take that next step. We didn't want to be presumptuous and start down that path without at least a check-in with you folks tonight. And if that's the direction we're getting, then we can start those conversations. This is a no obligation circumstance where we would be collecting more information to bring back to you at another future work session.
I think that summarizes it well out, Aaron.
Great. I mean, that's huge information for us. That's what I think is most important in my mind. Now with that, Keith and Nathan, if you guys are thinking about other things, or Brian too, I'm probably leaving out a bunch of stuff. You guys are the detail guys, but if we need more information, fire away, I guess.
So I think we're directing, going on your next steps, we're directing go get grant participation, get as much as you can with that. RFP for broadband service, I would think we'd want to see that to see what's going on. I mean, so I think that's a go ahead and go forward with. Let's talk about 2023 budget real quick. And Brett, you asked a great question, and it gets back also, I think, Lisa, you were mentioning it too, about community outreach. What is the community giving up if we spend a bunch of money on broadband? Does that mean Wild Wing doesn't get their park? Does that mean that we do not have an open space fund and no more open space? Does it mean that, even go to the ridiculous, we're not going to fix potholes? I don't know how far we go. and what's going on with that. And do you want much from us now? I don't know as we can, I've got my own opinions, but it's just an opinion. It's not based on reality.
I think us working through some of the cost models tighter and then having the revenue component better nailed down would serve you better in that decision making.
That's great.
And I think what might be realistic would be that we could make that part of the CIP discussion in the context of the budget down the road in the next couple of months as we get to that and have more information there.
You guys good? You guys good with that? Okay. All right. I think that's good.
I would add one thing to that conversation relative to the budget and the CIP is that we need to be very smart about applying for the grants as they become available here in the next short term and recognize that effect potentially on your budget as well from a local match standpoint and what that appetite is, just to make sure we're dialed in.
And if I can, I'll add one more thing. We do have, I don't remember if it was Keith or Mark, but somebody brought up ARPA, the American Relief Plan or Program. We do have funds from that, and it is typically earmarked towards infrastructure. Timnath has, and not streets. So we are a little bit painted in a corner, not able to use that money on obvious things. Broadband is our most obvious usage of that funds. So it gives us 1.2 million in the kitty to start. And so that gives us a good starting point if we were fortunate to get some of these grants offered to us, excuse me, that we would already have some money in the kitty to start that even before we talk about our CIP.
So here's my thought, see if everybody would like to do this. I'd like to give each of the council members, comments. It doesn't have to be on this list, doesn't have to be here, just comments that you would like to share both with the other council members and the staff that we may have already covered and you want to elaborate on, or something to that effect. So actually at this point, I'm going to ask who'd like to go first. Okay, Lisa.
Just because I have a quick question as a follow-up. Is there anything prohibiting us from using those funds as a match?
No.
Okay, because I know sometimes you get those funds and they can't be used as up.
It actually depends on which grant application. So some of them specifically say you can't use federal matches. The IIJA fund bucket, which is the BEAD program, that's 700 million. We hope the state of Colorado is going to get, does allow ARPA matches. So that's probably the best target for this community. So I would agree with Aaron that probably you'll be able to use that for that match. There are some other federal and other grant opportunities that specifically disallow federal match dollars.
Okay, thank you. And then just my final comment is I do think that if we feel like there's going to be a potential for a shorter timeline, I would encourage staff to think of ways that we can get some community input in a somewhat relatively quick timeline. I don't know how many people are watching this part right here, but I definitely think we've had open houses for other topics that have been quite popular. And I think this might be one that would benefit from something like that somewhat soon.
I think I spoke at length a few minutes ago, so I'll yield the floor.
Yeah, I agree with Robert on a lot of his points, especially inflationary pressure. So I think that if we could think quicker than moving slower, that'd be awesome. And then I really like your idea, Lisa, of getting an open house and having people come and tell us what they want. So I think that's great.
Brad?
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to make 3 points. One is I'm really anxious that we see the financial model on this project, what it is, not only for us, but also with our partner, because they got to make money. So if they aren't making money, it's going to come back to us. So I'd like to see a well thought out, real comfortable. And I understand financial models. I've been doing it for 40 years. I understand financial models don't always hit what you think you're going to hit, but your best shot. You guys are the experts. You know what's going on, and I'd want that. The second is chances are, if we decide to go ahead and do it immediately, in other words, not phase it over 8 years or so, we're going to need a significant amount of money, $3, $4, $5 million. My guess is our best bet is to borrow that money. I want us to go to the citizens and vote on allowing us to borrow money, much as what I think the intention was of the original charter. So I would want a vote. And the reason why I want to bring that point up, Aaron, is because that is a timeline, I know. And so I would want a vote and authorization, which will also let us then give out, double exempt bond that will be much more attractive than just a borrowing. And then the third thing is allocation of resources. I'd want the citizens to understand, if in fact we have to do this and we're going to need a budget of 4 or 5 years, let's say, to do the build out, maybe it's 1 year, I don't know, but whatever it is, what are they giving up? I mean, we're going to have to borrow money. We're going to have to pay it back. That's going to take it out of the budget. Does that mean, as I said earlier, no Wild Wing improvements? Does that mean no more improvements on Timnath Ranch? Does that mean we take away the fireworks display? That'll get us all killed. So what are they willing to give up in order to get broadband interspeed? So that's the three things I'd like to see us deal with in the coming months, years, whatever this is.
Understood.
So I think, Keith, did you want to do in closing remarks?
Mark, can I ask a quick question for
Yes,
you?
you may.
So I know ballot questions obviously have timelines as far as when we put it on the ballot, and we're limited to the times we can ask. What was your initial thought? Partly because I also think that I think we could ask community members, because I don't know that all of them would want to borrow. Maybe some are willing at this point to do an increase in sales tax. I have no idea. I know it's been quite a few years since anything ever came about, and I'm not one to jump on with we need to do a sales tax increase, but I think there are potentially ways other than borrowing that we could ask community members about that, which again would go on a ballot issue anyway, but it's a way to also get some of the revenue from people who don't just live in Timnath. So I would like to perhaps bring that, not jump into borrowing money, but talk to community members and see if what it is that they would want to support.
And I totally agree with you. Thank you for pinpointing it better. But I don't care what the funding source is, as long as the citizenry voted for it.
Yeah, and they would definitely have to vote for that. But that brings us back to kind of that timeline, because I know, and Aaron or Melissa, maybe you guys have a timeline as far as how soon before elections we need to have questions prepared and what all that kind of looks like.
So I can handle the first part of it, which is we have to express intent to be on the ballot for this November by the end of this month. I don't know that we have to have a specific question. I think we're earmarking space at that point. I'm going to defer to Melissa at this point.
Way to scramble.
Yeah.
That was a good Tarkington model.
So at the next meeting, we will be discussing 2 possible election related items to go on the November ballot, which in fact, I would have to tell the county by July 29th that yes, we want to be on there. And then our first meeting in August, we'd have to, you guys would have to consider an IGA with the county that would save our spot on the ballot and specifically say.
And see, I don't see any way in heck we can get a accurate, well thought out question there. So I think we're looking at next November as the earliest time. I mean, I think we can get all our ducks in a row. We ought to have a good feel from the citizenry if they are going to vote for it or not. And then
We could do some surveys in the meantime
Yeah.
too, in the interim.
Pardon?
We could do some surveys in the interim of some sort as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I agree.
Absolutely.
I agree that this November just seems a little bit,
Yeah.
you know, and I know obviously we can run a special election if we ever really needed to, if it came down to it, but I agree. I don't think this November is quite the time. I feel like if my own personal opinion is if I vote to put a question related to money on the ballot, I want to have a good sense that there's a good amount of support in the community before putting something like that on there.
Good comments. So Keith, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. Brian, thank you for your help. Nathan, I wish you didn't talk so much. You know, you made this meeting go way too long. And Mark, thank you for your input. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Would like to comment on. Okay, so
So moved.
do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Our meeting is adjourned.
Council meeting called to order at 6 o'clock. Mayor Mark Sukup,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brett Hansen,
Here.
Councilmember Lisa Lake,
Here.
Councilmember Robert Oxmacher,
Present.
Councilmember Luke Wagner.
Here.
Great. Any amendments to the agenda, Aaron? Okay. Any public comments, Melissa? Okay. We've got a consent agenda. Any questions on that? Okay. Could I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, reports. Mayor, sorry, I usually don't say much, but this one really affected me, and I wish Callie was here. But our 4th of July, as everybody knows, was just off the chart great. I mean, Callie did a great job and stuff. If you weren't there at 6:30 when the band started playing again, you missed something special. Brett, you were there, right, Brett? And you were too, Luke. Okay. And you can either agree with me or disagree on my next comments. But so I introduced the band. They started out with the national anthem. There's 4,500 people there, lots of kids running around, everything else. Everybody stopped. Everybody stood up. Everybody took their hats off. I mean, and it was pretty incredible. Then they said, we're going to do the anthem for all 5 service academies. And if you're a member of the academy, please stand up. And so they did the Army, the Navy, and each of them stood up and the people clapped and some waved flags and stuff like that went on. And then she got up and sang Lee Greenwood's Proud to Be an American. I mean, it even makes me choked up now. I mean, most of the people stood up and they're waving flags and stuff on it. I mean, you know, I felt like I was in Mayberry. I mean, it was so sweet, so nice. I was so proud to be in Timnath. And it was really something special. You guys want to add anything there? Okay.
I agree. That's it.
So it was really neat. And Callie, thank you. I don't know if you're listening, but thanks for your great work. As always, it was a great event. Anybody else have a report? Okay. Ordinance number 11, Series 2022, with a public hearing. An ordinance amending Chapter 18, Article 6 of the Town Municipal Code, adopting by reference the International Fire Code promulgated by the International Code Council 2021 edition with amendments. Matt.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm going to be very brief because I believe you've all seen the staff report. We've had it's come around second time now. And I've answered some questions from folks over that period of time. So I'm not going to go into the details of it, just to say that the town has a whole series of codes that we adopt. The fire code is primarily managed and the oversight is provided by PFA, partner with the town, Poudre Fire Authority. And so they go through and they actually update theirs every 3 years. So 2018 was the last version. 2021, they go through an exhaustive, rigorous process of reviewing that, making amendments, and the amendments are what are in your packet tonight that they came up with in conjunction with our building staff and Fort Collins building staff and Larimer County and other municipalities that they're partners with to come up with a universal, if I'll say that, universal version of this that they can apply throughout all the communities that they operate in. So this is a little different because we're only adopting this one, the International Fire Code normally. So then our other building codes we do on the other off years. So it'll be a couple of years from now, we'll do the remaining codes. So you'll see all those come back around, and this one, the International Fire Code, will be attached to it again, but it'll be kind of, all of these things will be coming at the same time. So that's kind of the procedural way that this happens. There's a lot of details in here. Obviously, we're referencing an International Fire Code book that's, I don't know how thick it is, but it's, several hundred pages or a couple hundred pages thick. So we didn't publish that with the packets. We only published what was the amendments to that. So those amendments are the things that they wanted to change from the book and apply universally. So, but I will introduce our colleagues here that have joined us tonight. Chief Bergson with the Poudre Fire Authority is here. We got Fire Marshal Jerry Howell is here as well, and Assistant Fire Marshal Sarah Carter. And Chief Bergson, if you want to say a few words to the council, that'd be fantastic. And then if there are any questions, I think Sarah has, or any of them, but Sarah has some technical expertise that she can answer any of the technical questions that might be there.
Good evening, Mayor and council members, and thank you, Matt and Aaron, for inviting us here tonight, and appreciate your support of the International Fire Code, the latest edition. I appreciate that as being a resident of Timnath, to ensure that all of our residents are safe and protected. And I definitely want to express my thanks to the entire board and all the members of Timnath for your support for Poudre Fire Authority with the impact fees and all the other relationships that we have. So definitely appreciate that. Appreciate being here and partnering as this process goes forward and working to implement these new changes. And I just want to say thank you again. And it's our honor to be here. And if you have any questions, more than happy to answer them. Okay. I didn't need the 10 minutes that you had talked about. So.
We love you. Anybody?
I just
go ahead, Robert.
Lisa has some questions on roundabouts is all.
You're pimping her?
Yes, he's
all
just
right.
teasing. I said I memorized all the numbers and all the details that were in there for sure.
We won't quiz you on those.
Any of you guys? Okay. Chief, thank you very much. And thanks the rest of you for showing up. And it's always actually is even better than it's a privilege and an honor that you guys work for us and do such a great job for our community. So we appreciate it.
Yep, thank you very much.
Any further, Matt?
The only one comment I've missed, Eli Johnson, our deputy building official, is here as well, and he can answer any other questions to show that basically he's been involved in this process as well to make sure that these things dovetail. Just wanted to
Thank you, Eli, for being here. Appreciate it. Do I have a motion to approve ordinance
Mayor.
number 11, series 2022? Do we have something else? Oh, do we have public comment?
I'll open the public hearing at 6:07 and there are no public comments. So we'll close it at 6:07.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve ordinance number 11, series 2022?
I'll move to approve amending ordinance, amending Chapter 18, Article 6 of the Town Municipal Code, adopting by reference the International Fire Code promulgated by the International Code Council 2021 edition with amendments.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ordinance number 11, series 2022, an ordinance amending Chapter 18, Article 6 of the Town Municipal Code, adopting by reference the International Fire Code promulgated by the International Code Council 2021 edition with amendments passed unanimously.
Thank you.
Any further things to bring forward? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.